you're going to build a house or a duplex, or you're going to rent it, community management isn't as big of a deal because you have one property that you or your property manager is taking care of. But anytime we get some density involved, community management can become an issue, especially when it pertains to how the ownership of the property is held.
Welcome to the Build to Rent podcast, the first ever real estate show dedicated exclusively to helping investors go from raw dirt to a cash-flowing rental property. Whether you're looking to do a massive syndication or a one-off rental property, the Build to Rent podcast will help you get there. Our hosts, Steve Olson, Chase Levitt, and Sherida Zanger, bring together more than 4,000 properties of experience as they break down how to find and finance projects, make the most of market and tax strategies, and maximize the returns of a build-to-rent portfolio. This is the Build to Rent podcast. And now, today's episode.
Welcome to the Build to Rent podcast. I'm Steve Olson, sitting here with Chase Levitt and Sherida Zanger as usual. We've got a great episode for you today, and we even had a fancy new intro that told you all the things that I always forget to tell you. Preston's going to be mad at me if I don't say subscribe, so please follow us on social media and on Spotify, Google, and iTunes. That way you can keep up with all the latest shows and the whatever we're up to over here at the podcast. And today we want to talk about something. We got the idea for this a few minutes ago when I was mad at an email that I got about community management, right? And so if you are going to build like a house or your own fourplex on an infill lot, Sherida, what's an infill lot?
A lot that's in the middle of other stuff that's already developed. So it's just a vacant piece of dirt. Maybe it's a neighbor subdivided something.
Yeah.
In the middle of stuff. It's not.
Yeah, so like a hole in the city, there's this vacant lot. Mm-hmm. So you're going to build a house or a duplex, or you're going to rent it. Community management isn't as big of a deal because you have one property that you or your property manager is taking care of. But anytime we get some density involved, community management can become an issue, especially when it pertains to how the ownership of the property is held. So most of our experience is should I just say kind of the worst part of that, where we have maybe 200 doors. They're platted as fourplexes. So that, follow my math here, that's 50 different properties, all owned by different owners. If we just build that and we let everybody have a property manager, but nobody is managing the community, it's a problem, isn't it?
It's a cluster.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. A cluster. So it's a big issue because what goes on inside of these properties isn't only the only thing that goes on inside of the development. And what happens outside, how people interact with their neighbors and the property itself, impact whether they want to renew leases, how much they want to pay in rent, how happy they are as a tenant. So there has to be one sheriff in town. So two ways to deal with that. If you're fractionalized ownership like us, there has to be an HOA. If it's one complex, right, then this becomes a little bit different. So we wanted to explore that a little bit more. What are some of the things that pop in your mind? Let's say we have 200 doors over here, 200 doors over here. One of them is one full property. It's one tax ID. The other is 50 properties. It's a bunch of fourplexes or something. What are some of the key differences in how those communities would be managed?
Well, let's talk about the 50 different units or...
Well, that's a little more intensive, yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about that because that's what FIG is, right? Pretty much. So as far as the HOA goes, if there's an HOA involved, which we like to set up, HOA is going to manage basically everything that's on the exterior. And it could be set up differently in different communities. If we're not talking about FIG, you can go different directions with it. But typically you're going to have a clubhouse involved that's being managed and taken care of. You're going to have landscaping, snow removal, and then we can talk about different utilities that are involved as well, such as water, sewer, garbage, just anything on the exterior of the building.
And the maintenance of the exterior of the building, which also the HOA is going to have insurance, which is going to cover the roof. That's a big thing that I know a lot of people ask about. But it's nice because if HOA is taking care of something, you know that every door in the project is going to be taken care of the same, rather than if Chase, Steve, and I all own in one little project and we own thirds of it, Steve may take care of his lawn, I may take care of the exterior, and Chase may take care of, some of the amenities. But if his looks really crappy and mine looks really good and Steve's looks really good, Chase's is going to bring down our value, or vice versa. But if you have one person, one HOA in there managing the whole thing, making it all look good, it's going to help your investment over the long term.
Yeah. And I think that's accurate in the real world. Chase would be the one to bring down the value. That's right. Okay. So something important to keep in mind there, because you've seen these communities where you can tell it's separate ownership. There's a bunch of those 2 up, 2 down, boxy looking fourplexes, right? You don't necessarily know how they're platted, but if there's disparity in how the community looks, that's your dead giveaway, is that a whole bunch of different people own these. It's a hodgepodge, right? So Chase isn't replacing his roof. He's letting people park wherever they want. There's an old Trans Am on the lawn, right? There's bikes everywhere. The lawn is dead. So when Sherida needs to lease her unit, of course, that is a property management responsibility, right? But these tenants pull up and they see Chase's unit. Those are my neighbors, right? What just happened to Sherida's rents? What just happened to her marketability of her building? It went down. And where this is dealt with, but it's kind of cannibalized in ways. So anytime you form an HOA, you're going to get a reserve study. You pay those monthly HOA dues as an owner. It covers most of your insurance obligations and many of your utilities, but reserves done by an engineer, a study, say, hey, this roof is going to need to be replaced in 15 years or whatever. The sidewalks, the asphalt, whatever. That money is saved so that it is there when the time comes. Conversely, you could not do a reserve study, although I don't think banks and insurance companies let you really get away with that. But HOA boards are notorious for cannibalizing those reserves and not charging enough. And then comes the dreaded word special assessment, right? Mm-hmm. And that's probably the biggest reason why people are afraid of investing in a property where it's subject to an HOA. So you need to think about that down the road. If you're doing a build for rent, this is going to come up. Why is a special assessment so terrible?
Because it could be thousands of dollars that you weren't expecting.
It could tank your numbers.
Yeah. It's like, surprise, brand new expense that you didn't account for, right?
No one planned for it. And I think that's a good thing. The HOAs that we use do reserve studies, and they're really good at making sure that they can manage what's going on. And they're out looking at the projects and making sure, hey, is there something we need to get ahead of time?
Yeah. So this morning, I got an email about a project that we had done in the Houston area. And the HOA is going to have a $10,000 bill, because that's the deductible for the community. The crazy lightning storm fried a couple of the electrical circuits or something in the fire riser rooms, right? And so they're going to have to file a claim. But they have reserves, they have budgets, they're watching this. It's no big deal. The money is there, and they can pay for that repair. When that money is not there, that's when things begin to get really, really cranky. So when it's an investor-owned community, that reserves and that whole situation is kind of handled differently than if it's a bunch of homeowners, right? That's different too. So you have to take that into consideration. We're getting ready to do a project here in Utah that's going to be mixed, right? Where we have a big central clubhouse, and that's going to have a pool and a gym and a leasing office and an HOA office, right? And then to the left side is going to be a rental community of condos and townhomes. And to the right side is going to only be a for sale community of townhomes. Those two demographics kind of have different needs and wants, don't they?
Yeah, so that's why we're going to do 2 HOAs in that community.
Yeah. A master and then 2 sub HOAs, right? So they can't be totally separate, because they will interact with one another, but they're not necessarily always under the same rules.
They may have different needs.
That's right. That's right. Any other thoughts on HOAs and the complexities of them and what to watch out for? Because I know, Chase, you're on a board right now, aren't you?
Yeah. Tucker's Row in Vineyard, Utah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts. So when looking into an HOA, whether it's FIG or a different potential investment that you're looking into, couple of things that come to mind. You want to look at, okay, who's in charge of that HOA? The board. Who's running the show? Who's making the shots? Who's voting and being able to make decisions? I think that's huge. And then also just looking under the hood a little bit, understanding what you're paying per month, understanding what's included in that, if there's value there. I know there's some HOAs where a builder or a developer or whoever is still getting paid a certain number. And so you gotta see if that makes sense. Not all of them. We don't do that. So you gotta really look into that and see, okay, I'm paying 100, 150, 200 per unit per month. What is that going to? So understand the HOA fees, understand if there's value there. A lot of times there will be, sometimes there's not. Understand if there's a HOA transfer fee. Transfer fees aren't the worst, but understand what it is. We do a transfer fee, and a lot of that transfer fee goes to building up the interest reserve account, it'll help to make it healthy if we do have a roof that goes out or something that happens, right? And so just understand the HOA, who's doing what, who's running what, how much control you have. So HOAs, they're very important. They can be key if they're set up correctly, and they also can crush you as well if they're not.
Yeah. You have to have a good board, people that care and are going to take time, because for the most part, most residents don't pay attention until they're mad, right, about something. It's like politics, right? We don't want to be involved, but we want to yell at everybody that is, right? So there's probably more good HOA boards than there are politicians. Quick poll, yes?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to start doing more quick unofficial polls that I just surprise you with.
Yeah, I think HOAs scare a lot of people, but I don't think it's something that you need to run away from. But
Just
like Jay said, just
understand
understand it.
it.
Yeah. Know what you're getting into. I think ours are actually really good in the sense of you're getting more bang for your buck. Some of them you're not.
We'll have Tom come on the show one of these days and talk about HOAs and some of those complexities. But when you have an HOA involved, you're moving line items around on your pro forma, right? Things that you would normally budget for, like most of your insurance and maintenance and things like that, are separate line items, and they mostly disappear and they get shifted into an HOA line item. It's the same effect on the numbers, but the control is different. So when we talk about community management going away from fractionalized to uniform, right, it's different, because in this case, the property manager is the boss across the board, are they not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones calling the shots.
So the property manager and how they get paid, typically, the larger the community, the lower the management fee, but then you also have payroll. So you're going to have an on-site manager that you're paying, and they're the one that people come to. My toilet's broken, right? And they're getting paid oftentimes in reduced rent and then a small salary to live there and to be the boss, to be the sheriff of that community. And then beyond that, you've got your advertising costs and things. This world of management and HOA comes much more together because it's one on-site community manager.
And I think that's another thing to double check, because in ours, HOA and property management are separate. They do work hand in hand, but there are a lot of times that people will say, oh, shouldn't that be the same line item? And I think it's because they think that property management and HOA are the same thing, but ours are broken out. So double check. If it's a one whole community, it's usually together. And
it's all in how the ownership of the community is held. Really, that is the determining factor. Yep. You could have a situation where an entire community is in a master planned development that's subject to a development agreement, where you have one property manager and the entire thing is subject to an HOA. That could happen as well. Okay, well, this is HOA is kind of like a topic like insurance. You can only talk about it for so long before you're done, but it's important. You have to pay attention. Any last words on HOA and community management?
Dig in.
Yeah, dig in. Don't be afraid when you see it. Don't throw up your hands. Just understand it. Look into it a little bit further. Understand what you're getting into. It's huge.
And we'll get into another episode in the future with more specifics. Like, I've got a bunch of loose ends that I'm working on. I'm on an HOA board as well. And some of the things that we've noticed are helpful in community management. So We'll catch you next time on the Build for Rent podcast. Remember to like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening to the Build to Rent podcast. You are now just a few clicks away from joining our community of Build to Rent investors. All you have to do is follow our show on Facebook, LinkedIn, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can also watch this episode and more by subscribing to the Build to Rent podcast on YouTube. The information presented in this podcast is general in nature. Nothing in this presentation should be construed as financial advice or recommendations for any particular situation. The hosts are only licensed to provide advice and services in the states where they are specifically licensed, and listeners should seek the advice from an appropriately licensed professional in the area where they invest. The examples presented in this presentation are for illustration only, and no guarantee that similar results can be achieved, since the facts, circumstances, and participants are all different.